There's been an update in the murder investigation of 23-year-old Airman Roger Fortson, who was shot and killed by a Florida sheriff's deputy as he answered the door with a gun in his South Florida apartment after the deputy responded to a disturbance call. Let's talk about it. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Southern Draw Law. My name is James White, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, former police officer. If you don't remember my video, I put a link to it in the description. Go back and check it out. But Roger Fortson was a 23-year-old airman down in South Florida who was playing video games and talking to his girlfriend on the telephone. It's still kind of unknown what happened, but someone called the police, said there was a disturbance. They thought there was a big fight in this apartment. The police show up. Fortson has no idea that they're there for him. He opens the door. He's holding his pistol back at his right side, and Deputy Eddie Duran shot and killed him. Fortson's girlfriend was on the phone with him at the time, and I did a whole video breaking down the incident, so I encourage you to go check that out. Since I've done the last video, they have actually charged Deputy Eddie Duran with manslaughter with a firearm. So let's check out the news story and we'll get the update, and then we'll come back and talk about Florida law and manslaughter with a firearm.
A former Florida deputy who's been charged with manslaughter in the fatal shooting of a U.S. airman. The deputy fired seconds after the airman opened the door of his home while holding a gun. His gun was pointed down to the ground. How the airman's family is responding tonight. Here's ABC's Victor Akendo.
Tonight, the Florida deputy who fatally shot senior airman Roger Fortson in his doorway, now charged with manslaughter with a firearm.
Sheriff's office, open the door!
Okaloosa County Deputy Eddie Duran was responding to a domestic disturbance call back in May when he approached Fortson's apartment in Fort Walton Beach. Duran's body camera video showing the 23-year-old airman answering the door, a gun in his hand pointed toward the ground. In seconds, the deputy shooting Fortson repeatedly, killing him. Duran, later fired by the sheriff's office after an internal investigation determined his use of deadly force was not objectively reasonable.
We deserve justice. My brother deserves justice.
For months, Fortson's relatives demanding that deputy also be charged. Tonight, in a statement, the family saying in part, "Nothing can ever bring Roger back, and our fight is far from over, but we are hopeful that this arrest and these charges will result in real justice." If convicted, that deputy faces a maximum sentence of 30 years in state prison. Lindsay?
Victor, thank you.
They've already fired him for escalating this encounter to deadly force in the absence of any legal justification for killing Mr. Fortson. After that, he was charged with manslaughter. And then after that, attorney Benjamin Crump has brought a lawsuit.
And the family of an airman from Metro Atlanta who was shot and killed by a Florida deputy has filed a federal civil lawsuit. Roger Fortson was killed in Okaloosa County, Florida last May. Fortson was shot just seconds after opening the door of his apartment. That deputy was responding to a disturbance call. And in the video, Fortson is holding a gun that is pointed at the floor. That deputy shoots him within a second of telling him to step back. Well, this lawsuit named the deputy, Eddie Duran, the apartment complex where it happened, and a leasing agent.
We believe Roger's death was as a result of a pattern and practice here in Okaloosa County.
There's no justice for my baby. I want accountability. I want accountability because he was 23. I want accountability because he had life ahead of him. I want accountability because he was in his own home.
Yeah, the sheriff says that Deputy Eddie Duran was wrong for firing his weapon. He was fired and later charged with manslaughter.
Okay, under Florida law, we have 782.07, and this is under the homicide statute. Manslaughter is what we're talking about here. Under subsection 1, we have the killing of a human being by the act, procurement, or culpable negligence of another without lawful justification, according to the provisions of Chapter 776, and in cases in which such killing shall not be excusable homicide or murder, according to the provisions of this chapter. It is manslaughter, a felony of the second degree, and under Florida law, manslaughter with a firearm is a first-degree felony. So there's a enhancement if you commit manslaughter with a firearm, and it carries a maximum penalty of 30 years in prison, 30 years of probation, and a $10,000 fine. It's a form of negligent homicide, meaning that the death occurred without malice, but with a reckless disregard. And so what you have really here is that you're going to have the prosecution trying to prove that essentially Deputy Duran was not privileged under, the privileges that would be afforded to law enforcement in the event that deadly force would be authorized. And they do mention Chapter 776, and that's because it lists out the reasons for justifiable use of force. Basically, you have to go through these and make sure that there's nothing here that you would be able to use in order to justify the use of force. And so specifically as it relates to law enforcement, you have 776.05, law enforcement officers' use of force in making an arrest, or 776.06, deadly force by a law enforcement or correctional officer. Well, he's not making an arrest. And in fact, that's what it really boils down to. Essentially, what we have to look at is the fact that Deputy Duran had no reasonable articulable suspicion that Mr. Fortson was involved in a crime. In fact, he had no information that a crime had actually taken place. He had information that there was a potential disturbance. I don't think we even know that the call was referring to the correct address. Obviously, it was the address that the person pointed to, the person who worked at the apartment complex. But it wasn't, in fact, the address where anything was going on. But the point is, Deputy Duran didn't have any cause to even perform a Terry detention of this guy. He hasn't found a crime. He does have maybe the responsibility to go answer the call and go do an investigation, but does not include just shooting someone as soon as they open the door. Florida is a very firearm-friendly place. America is a very firearm-friendly place these days, certainly in the South, and it's completely legal in the state of Florida to answer your door with a firearm in your hand. Now, obviously, there can be some consequences to that, and that's what we're seeing here. But that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it legal. But let's look at the law enforcement justification for using deadly force under 776.06. So it says, as applied to a law enforcement officer or correctional officer acting in the performance of his or her official duties, the term deadly force means force that is likely to cause death or great bodily harm, and includes the firing of a firearm in the direction of the person to be arrested. Okay, again, we have no arrest, even though no intent exists to kill or inflict great bodily harm, and the firing of a firearm at a vehicle, well, that's not the issue. The term deadly force does not include the discharge of a firearm by a law enforcement officer or correction officer during and within the scope of his or her official duties, which is loaded with less lethal ammunition. So that doesn't apply either. So we don't have a justification under 776, and we don't have a justification under 776.05 because there's no arrest to be made. But let's just look at the section here. A law enforcement officer, any person whom the officer is summoned, so basically if you're helping a police officer, need not retreat or desist from efforts to make a lawful arrest because of resistance or threatened resistance. The officer is justified in using any force which he reasonably believes necessary to defend himself or herself or another from bodily harm while making the arrest. Again, he does not make the arrest. He has no legal justification and no probable cause to make the arrest. And that's what this case really hinges on. He had no reason that would justify him detaining Mr. Fortson under the law according to the tenets of Terry versus Ohio. And because he didn't have the right to even do a detention, he certainly didn't have probable cause to make an arrest. And so this section that would ordinarily give him privilege to potentially use deadly force if he encounters somebody he's trying to arrest with a gun does not apply. And that's probably the reason he was charged. Ben Crump did include the apartment complex as a defendant in this case because ordinarily, as an attorney, you wouldn't necessarily sue everybody who could be liable, but anybody with deep enough pockets to help satisfy the judgment, you might potentially sue. I thought maybe there was a chance that they could include the apartment complex because if you kind of get into this thing and you listen to the 911 call, this was pretty reckless, pretty negligent on behalf of the apartment complex to insist that these police officers go to this door, and they didn't really have a good foundation for a reasonable belief that somebody was actually being hurt, in my opinion. And so as an attorney, I might have considered including the apartment complex as a defendant in this case, because again, if for some reason an officer gets qualified immunity or they dismiss the agency or the government agency as a defendant, then at least you have another defendant that you can hold accountable for this, who was intricately involved in the police being led to this door and ultimately, under a false allegation. But again, that wasn't the sort of causal link. It certainly was a contributing factor, I would say, because it wasn't the fact that they were there. It was the officer's reaction to the stimulus of seeing Roger Fortson with a gun that caused this. In closing, I just wanted to update you guys. I thought this was interesting. I remember saying in my original video that I thought if he was charged, that's probably what he would be charged with. So hopefully there's a conviction. I'm not confident based on what we saw out of both Michigan and Memphis, Tennessee last week, but still, the agency has done the right thing. They have fired him. The investigating agency in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement has recommended him for prosecution. The prosecutor has charged him, which is a step in the right direction, even though it's probably an uphill climb for an actual conviction. But again, Fortson was so clean. He didn't have anything going on. There's nothing that anybody can say about his conduct. There's no way they can really victim blame. He's just a kid that was serving his country and showed up at his own door doing what most Florida residents would do, and he got shot for it. So as this case unfolds and we get more updates, I'll update you guys, but I just wanted to put it on your radar. I'd like to invite you to head over to Substack and join our community there. We now have over 200 community members in our Substack community. It's absolutely free to join. You don't have to pay. There is a paid tier if you'd like to support the channel monetarily, but you don't have to do that. I make every post available to every person who's a subscriber there. If you don't want to come to Substack, but you'd still like to support the channel monetarily, I'll post my Venmo and PayPal links both here on the screen as well as in the description. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment on the video. Check out some of the other videos on the channel and leave a comment on there as well. Until I see you again, take care. Always film your interactions with the police and keep your evidence to yourself.